In the spring of 2020, President Nelson said, "Let us prayerfully plead for relief from this global pandemic. I invite all, including those not of our faith, to fast and pray on Good Friday, April 10th, that the present pandemic may be controlled, caregivers protected, the economy strengthened, and life normalized." We fasted. We prayed. Has God heard these prayers? What would this miraculous end of the pandemic look like? What would this miracle look like? Like President Nelson, I believe that doctors and scientists can be inspired with treatments to bring about miraculous healing. President Nelson has talked about being inspired with treatments as a doctor long before he was a leader in our church. I too have felt God's inspiration in my own scientific career, even as early as 15 when I received my patriarchal blessing with career guidance. When President Nelson was vaccinated, he said, "We have prayed frequently for this literal godsend." I too believe that these vaccines can be the end of this pandemic, but the victory over coronavirus requires our participation. We learn about other miracles requiring our participation from the Bible in 2 Kings chapter 5. Naaman was afflicted with leprosy. An Israelite maid came to him and told him that if he went to the prophet Elisha, Elisha could heal him miraculously. Naaman went to Elisha and begged for a miracle. Elisha told Naaman to go down to the river Jordan and wash 7 times. This made Naaman angry. He had expected Elisha to cure him with a wave of his hand. But instead, Naaman left angry. He didn't want to get into that dirty river. One of Naaman's servants came to him and helped him to understand that he had a role to play in this miracle. When Naaman went down to the river Jordan and washed 7 times, he was healed. Like President Nelson, I believe that these vaccines can be the end of this pandemic. I see the record speed that the vaccines were developed and produced as miraculous. I see the worldwide collaboration that scientists and doctors made, and these discoveries that they made as miraculous. I also see as a scientist that if we all do our part and take these vaccines, this pandemic can be over. But a lot of people have concerns about taking the vaccines, and having questions about a new vaccine is normal. Like Naaman, we look down at that river and we say, why? How is this going to end the pandemic? This is where I feel inspired to help. You are my people. You are a community that I love. I want to help. I don't want anyone to feel forced or pressured. I just want us to be able to make informed decisions. And so for that reason, I want to answer these questions. When we have the answers to our questions, we can make informed decisions and feel confident in those answers, in those decisions. So these are some of the questions that I'll address in this presentation. Is mRNA technology new? What are the side effects of taking a vaccine? Can the vaccine affect fertility? Can the vaccine modify my genes? Can they track me with this vaccine? This vaccine was developed fast. Is it safe? How do we know? Should I get vaccinated if I'm young and not at risk for COVID-19? What's the safety data for the Johnson & Johnson vaccine? Why this pause? And for that matter, what does that mean about the other vaccines? It's easiest to think about this pandemic as a coronavirus army invading humanity, invading individual people. The coronavirus goal is to take over our bodies to make more virus. The immune system is our defensive army. Its goal is to detect and destroy a virus. Different viruses have different codes. If our immune system has not seen a code before, it doesn't have any defense against it. It doesn't have the tools to dismantle that threat. So here you can see the coronavirus compared to the polio virus and the influenza virus. A virus can't make more of itself alone. A virus can only make more of itself when it infects a cell. It hijacks your body to produce itself. Once a virus is in our cells, it builds its army. It makes millions more virus. And infected cells release new viruses to infect more cells in our bodies, and infected people produce and breathe out virus before they even feel symptoms. So even if this individual here never felt anything more than the sniffles, this person still produced coronavirus that could infect older people, pregnant women, or chemotherapy patients who don't have strong immune systems, and therefore the virus can take over and really cause them serious disease and even death. So preventing infection saves lives, saves people that we love who don't have strong immune systems to protect their bodies. The virus can also use our bodies to mutate to become stronger, more infectious, or deadlier. These are those new variants that we hear about in the news. A new variant of the virus could also cause serious or severe illness in new populations, like younger people or children. The coronavirus can shut down whole organs if it isn't stopped. In the lungs, that would mean that you couldn't clear fluid or breathe. This is called pneumonia. Coronavirus infections produce blood clots in 16.5% of infections, even in those who had mild cases. The coronavirus infection can also damage the heart, the liver, and the kidneys to cause failure of these organs, which can kill a person. It can damage the brain by causing strokes. And as of April 12th, there were over 550,000 deaths caused by coronavirus infections in the United States alone, and over 2.9 million people have died of coronavirus infections in the world. But most of us are not at risk of severe COVID-19. Mild and moderate COVID-19 cases include shortness of breath, cough or sore throat, loss of taste and smell that can last for months, fever, headache, fatigue that can also last for months, mini strokes that people describe as brain fog, hair loss that occurs between 2 and 5 months after infection. I've had several friends that have even shown me the loss of hair that they received, that they had after they had a COVID-19 infection. And these friends were between the ages of 20 and 30 years old. They were not older people. COVID-19 infections have also been associated with depression, heart palpitations, and COVID toes, which look like these. These results are published in these references down here. And a lot of my references are down at the bottom of the PowerPoint slide. Our immune system fights back when it detects an infection. Our immune system will raise our temperature to slow down the virus. Viruses hate high temperatures. So that's why we get a fever when we have an infection. We also might feel tired or sore as our body builds a defense against the virus. This is our immune system fighting back. So what helps this coronavirus army? Having a coat or a uniform that isn't recognized. This is a new virus and our immune system hasn't seen it. We don't have the tools to dismantle it unless we've been vaccinated or if we've been infected before and recovered. The other thing that helps the coronavirus army win over our body is having high numbers invading at the same time. That makes it hard for our body to build up an immune response that is adequate because the coronavirus had a head start. Another reason that the coronavirus does well in a body and hurts us more is if we have a weaker immune system, which is the case for people who are on immunosuppressants or chemotherapy, or maybe older or pregnant. All of those reasons people have a weaker immune system. Right now, we are outnumbered. The coronavirus is everywhere because there are so many people infected and breathing out virus. And this isn't totally new. Viruses have closed down the world before. Polio in the 1950s was a huge problem and caused paralysis and death for a lot of people. This is a polio ward in 1950. So what would help our immune system. How did we win over the pandemics that have happened in the past? A vaccine is a warning sign to your immune system to kill the virus before it takes over your cells. So for polio, that meant a warning sign with a dead or crippled virus that couldn't hurt you the same way that the full virus could. It would be like bringing an injured soldier back to your side to show what that enemy army uniform looked like. And that would give your side an advantage. Later vaccines were developed that were just part of that army uniform, like the helmet of an army uniform. So it wasn't dangerous at all on its own, but it did give your side a warning. Those vaccines worked. Here you can see a graph that shows the number of infections in the United States of various different diseases, including polio and the measles. All of these are caused by different viruses. Once the vaccine is developed, that's this orange circle here, you can see enough people took that vaccine for polio that we completely eradicated polio. I've never been worried that my kids would be infected with polio because so many people were vaccinated. We won against polio. But this took a long time. It took decades to develop several of these vaccines. And the other issue was that a virus, even an injured virus or the coat decoration, had to be grown in cells like chicken eggs. And most vaccines were produced in chicken eggs. But 2% of children are allergic to chicken eggs, and allergic reactions scare people. So mRNA to the rescue. Scientists have been working for the last 30 years to develop vaccines using what's called mRNA. What's mRNA? M stands for messenger in our body's natural language. Our cells, every cell in our body is full of mRNA. This is a natural substance. Plus RNA is degradable instructions, like a degradable pattern that we use to sew part of a uniform, for example. So our cells will produce part of the uniform as a warning sign of what that virus is wearing. It doesn't even need to produce the whole virus or part of the injured virus, just a tiny part like a button on a coat. The other advantage to mRNA is mRNA vaccines can be developed fast. As soon as a virus is detected, those instructions can be copied and a warning signal sent out. mRNA can also be made fast. In my lab, it takes us about an hour to make mRNA, whereas to make one of those coat decorations, it would take several days. mRNA can be adapted fast as new variants are detected, and there's less potential for allergic reactions because there are less ingredients, and none of them are made in cells. So is mRNA technology new? Not really. I've been working with mRNA even since the 1990s myself, when I started working in labs, and scientists have been working on developing mRNA vaccines since the 1990s. mRNA vaccines against cancer, the flu, HIV, Zika, and rabies started clinical trials well before 2017. And those are described in this article down below that was published in 2017. You're welcome to read that to learn about this technology. So how were these vaccines developed so fast? Funding was available. Every country in the world that had money to give to science was giving it for this problem, to develop a vaccine against COVID. The other reason is that there's been science research that's been going on for decades so that we can read genes or instructions to make things fast. We know the code for these coat decorations, and research about RNA and how to get into cells has been going on for a long time. These new vaccine methods had already been developed before the pandemic hit, and they just had to be applied to a new question. Scientists from all over the world have been working together on this, and that speeds things up. Collaboration helps. So what's in an mRNA vaccine? It's a tiny lipid or fat droplet. So you can think of this as something like olive oil. It's not olive oil, it's a different kind of fat. And these fats have fancy names in the ingredient list for these vaccines. But that's just because anything, when it's broken down to its chemical name, sounds a little bit intimidating. but it's not, it's just fat. Then there's mRNA that is the pattern to make part of that enemy uniform or coat decoration. And there's salt water and sugar. So nothing really scary. It's also vegan. It doesn't use any cells, not any kind of cells at all, to make mRNA vaccines. So these are different from traditional vaccines that way. Our cells then make part of that coat decoration to show our immune cells what the enemy is wearing. So here's that little fat droplet dropping in some mRNA. mRNA is then read by our cells because it's natural. This is something that our cells do all the time. They read mRNA of our own making. mRNA is not DNA. Our genes are made of DNA. This mRNA can't go near our DNA because our DNA is housed in this nucleus. It's protected by a fat layer and also by other things that keep that DNA tightly packaged and protected. So this mRNA vaccine cannot modify your genes. So once our cells have read that mRNA message, they produce those coat decorations that can then be displayed. The mRNA is degraded within 2 hours after the injection. Those coat decorations are displayed, and our body produces what are called antibodies to specifically recognize that coat decoration. So it's like a warning sign, a Snapchat warning sign, saying anyone wearing this hat is the enemy. Destroy it before it destroys you. Our immune response is amazing. We produce antibodies to neutralize the virus. What that means is these antibodies cover the virus so that it cannot infect cells. It bounces right off. If the virus can't get into our cells, it can't make more of itself. It can't build its army up, and it cannot turn your cells against you or your loved ones. The antibodies then present the virus to cells and enzymes to teach your immune system to destroy the virus. I demonstrated these as a Pac-Man because I'm a child of the 80s. Then we teach, a vaccine teaches the immune cells to kill infected cells. This is really important because we don't want traitor cells to be working against us. We need to kill those cells so that we don't produce more virus that can hurt us or other people. So how are vaccines different from medications that we're familiar with and comfortable with, like Tylenol and ibuprofen? These medications distribute throughout your body and stay in your system for several hours. They'll bring down your fever. They might make you feel better if you're feeling sore, but they do not do anything to hurt that virus. The virus is continuing to hurt your cells and replicate in your body. Vaccines, on the other hand, these mRNA vaccines are restricted to that injection site. They're broken down within 2 hours after injection. So you don't even have any more vaccine in your body shortly after you were vaccinated. It's your immune system that's doing all the work. Your immune system has given this warning and then it destroys the virus. Your immune system is the cure and the prevention of a coronavirus infection. It's the most natural medication or cure that there is. It's only your own immune system now that it's been given a warning. So how do we know if these vaccines are safe? All of the vaccines that have been approved in the United States have undergone animal testing for safety and also for antibodies in mice and monkeys. So these results have been published both for the Pfizer and Mrna vaccines, as well as the Johnson & Johnson vaccines. And these results are published also in a scientific journal that's down here. Then clinical trials are conducted in humans. There are 3 phases of clinical trials. Phase 1 is basically like the same kind of test as is done in animals to look for whether these vaccines are safe and produce antibodies in a small group of people. Then phase 2 is looking for whether, again, checking very carefully for any kind of safety concern, looking to see if they're effective. That means that they prevent COVID-19 symptoms in a small group. Between 100 and 1,000 people. Then phase 3 broadens that group to between 10,000 and 50,000 volunteers. Again, they're looking for safety and efficacy, but now they have a range of different ages, different medical histories, and different racial backgrounds in that large group of people so that they can make sure that it's safe and effective in all sorts of situations. So let's talk about the data from the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccines. These data are completely available to anyone who wants to look for them. They're published in scientific journals, and they're also available in the CDC website. So the clinical trials for the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine included 43,448 volunteers that were 16 years old and older. 45% of these were between the ages of 56 and 85 years old, so in a risk category for severe COVID-19, and 30% of them were racially diverse, including people who identify as Black, Latino, or Native American. Then half of these people are given a shot with no vaccine, just salt water, and half of them receive the real vaccine. They don't know which group that they're in. And then they report anything that they're feeling, any symptoms, any side effects. They just report how they're feeling. And if, for example, there are more side effects in people who receive a vaccine, for example, if people reported that they were feeling more tired and they were in this vaccine group than the people that were in the placebo group, then you would say, yes, that's a symptom, or that's a side effect of the vaccine. And then if anyone felt any symptoms, they were tested for COVID-19, and those results were reported. Okay, so what were the results? For those people who only got the saltwater shot and then went out around in their daily lives, there were 162 cases of COVID-19. So these are cases that did not require hospitalization, but could be mild to moderate cases. And then there were 9 people who had severe COVID-19 that required hospitalization. So these are people who just went about their daily lives, not knowing whether they got the vaccine or not. And this many people got infected with the amount of coronavirus infections that were around at the time of this clinical trial. Now, those people that received the COVID-19 vaccine that was developed by Pfizer, in that group, there were only 7 mild COVID-19 cases and 1 severe COVID-19 case. These results are published in this journal article from the New England Journal of Medicine that's down here. So what this tells us is that the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine protected people from getting COVID-19 symptoms because there were less people who got COVID-19 cases in this group than the group that did not get the vaccine. So for the Mrna vaccine, there were 30,000 participants between the ages of 18 and 90 years old in the phase 3 clinical trials. 11,000 of these were people of color. 5,000 people had risk factors, including diabetes, severe obesity, cardiac disease, and 7,000 of these people were over the age of 65. So these are people who are at risk for severe COVID-19, these older people, for example. So for the Mrna clinical trials, in the group that got an empty shot, there were 196 cases of COVID-19, 30 cases of severe COVID-19, and 1 COVID-19 related death. Whereas in those people that got the Mrna COVID-19 vaccine, there were only 11 mild COVID-19 cases. So because there were less people who got COVID-19 just walking around and being exposed to coronavirus, just like these people over here, that meant that that vaccine protected them from COVID-19 symptoms. And these results are also published in the Journal of New England, the New England Journal of Medicine. You can trust this clinical trials data because it's been collected in over 100 hospitals. It's been reviewed by several different panels, and none of these people have a vested interest in the results. They're not given extra money if it goes one way or another. They're just trying to make sure that a vaccine is safe and effective, and it's going to do what we want it to do. So these different agencies all review that data and then make a decision on whether or not to give the vaccine. Then after the vaccines were made public and allowed to be administered to hospitals around the country, there were post-clinical trial studies done for Pfizer and Mrna vaccines in 3 different universities. Southwestern, UCLA, and UCSD. And these studies were published in the New England Journal of Medicine. So what did they do for the study? There were some hospital employees that wanted to be vaccinated and others that didn't. So there were people who received no vaccine, and everyone was tested for COVID-19, whether or not they had symptoms. So these people who had no vaccine but were wearing a mask, as protocols are for hospitals, these people, there were 234 infections out of 8,969 people who were tested. So that's 2.6% of those people got COVID-19 even though they were wearing a mask. Now, if someone just had one dose of one of the vaccines, the infections were reduced from that 234 to 112 infections out of 6,144. So that number is reduced. And then after 2 doses of vaccine, so full vaccination, there were only 4 cases of COVID-19 or 4 infections out of 8,121. So that's a dramatic reduction in COVID-19 infections. Now remember, they're not even looking for symptoms here. They're looking for infections. This tells us that these vaccines decrease the number of infections. And these results are shown in this graph here. So this is the reduction of infections, testing some people who agreed to be studied who were not vaccinated, and those that were partially vaccinated, and those that were fully vaccinated. Now down here below, this is just reporting all of the infections that were reported in that hospital by employees. And they are going up and up, just like they were for the rest of the country over time between October and December. For the rest of the country who didn't get vaccinated, those infections continued to go up. Oops. Over this time. However, vaccination started in this hospital around December 15th, and immediately infection rates started to go down. Once 70% of the employees were vaccinated, those infections went down to negligible numbers. So the Pfizer and Mrna vaccines protect 95% of people from even mild COVID-19 symptoms and protect almost everyone from severe COVID-19 and COVID-19 related death. This is an amazing number. So I've heard questions of why get the second dose? Why get vaccinated after I've had COVID-19? And this journal article and this graphic helps to explain that. So here in green, this is people who have no knowledge of being infected with coronavirus. And the dots each represent the amount of antibodies in a person's blood. Now remember, antibodies are what cover that virus and prevent infection. They're what our immune system makes to protect us against any disease. So in this group of people, you can see most people cluster down here by around 0 amount of antibodies against COVID-19. But there are some people who have some antibodies. These people likely had asymptomatic infections that they never even tested for. Now, these people in purple had a COVID-19 infection. They had done a test and knew that they had been infected with COVID-19. Now, some of them have a lot of antibodies protecting them, whereas others don't have very many antibodies protecting them. They're basically like this group down over here. Now, after 1 dose of a COVID-19 vaccine, the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine, these people in the green now have tons of antibodies, a lot more than they had. So they're now even better protected than those people who had a natural COVID-19 infection. And those people that had a COVID-19 infection and then also got vaccinated, they have even more antibodies protecting them. Now, after the second dose, all of these people are very well protected against COVID-19, but there are a few stragglers down here. And what that means is that they had a weaker immune system, and their immune system can't mount a really good defense against this virus. The side effects that you can expect with any vaccine are soreness, fatigue, and potentially a mild fever. And these show that your body is building a defense against the virus. I think of it like morning sickness, because morning sickness does not impact every woman who is pregnant. But for someone like me, I was sick almost every day. And every day that sickness was a sign that I had a healthy pregnancy going on. At the same time, there are many women who have been pregnant and never felt morning sickness. And that didn't mean that their body didn't have a healthy pregnancy going on. So if you don't have side effects, like I didn't have any real side effects besides a little soreness in my arm and a little bit of, like I took a nap the day after the second dose. But that doesn't tell me that the immune response isn't good. You still can have a very strong immune response, even if you didn't have a side effect. Allergic reactions are rare, but they do occur. They've occurred in about 3 to 5 people out of every million vaccinations. So this is rare compared to other allergies, like an egg allergy is 2 children out of every 100. So how do our decisions about vaccination affect our community? This is a demonstration that was generously given to me by Richard Harris and NPR. And here you can see the same group of people. You can think of this as three scenarios of the same ward with exactly the same people composing these 3 squares. I've pointed out some people who might be in that ward, someone who's undergoing chemotherapy, even a young child who can't get a vaccine, older people who can get vaccines, older adults that might be able to get a vaccine but have chemotherapy going on or immunosuppressants, and so they can't build a strong immune response, or a pregnant woman who again has a suppressed immune system. So these are members of our ward in different scenarios, whether there's 5% of our ward that's vaccinated. The vaccinated people are these darker shapes, whereas the lighter shapes are people who are healthy but unvaccinated. And then the pink shapes are infected members who come into that community. So if we run the simulation and show what it would look like in these different scenarios, you can see that if there are only 5% of the group who are vaccinated, that virus can spread very rapidly throughout that population and really impact people who would not fare well with that infection. Whereas if 30% of the people are vaccinated, this protects even some of the people who weren't vaccinated because it slows down the rate of infection. But sadly, still, there are going to be some who get infected even if they were vaccinated, because there are so many infected people around them and their exposure to the virus is high. If 75% of that same group of people was vaccinated, many of these people are protected, and so that they don't have to deal with the severe disease or infection or the stress. Those are just small groups that get infected, and a lot of us are protected. So that's the reason that we care whether other people get vaccinated, because it helps to protect all of us, even those people who can't mount a really good immune response to any kind of infection. So how can I show love for my neighbor? Without the vaccine, the virus can use you. It can use your body to hurt you and people you love. When you take a vaccine, you destroy coronavirus and you save people that you love. We protect vulnerable people in our community by being vaccinated. We can protect ourselves and our neighbors from mild or moderate symptoms like cough, congestion, mini strokes, hair loss, and depression. And we can show love for our neighbors by using our strong immune systems to protect those who cannot protect themselves. So now let's talk about the Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca vaccines. These are vaccines that still are a warning sign showing a decoration on the virus coat, but they're made and delivered to cells differently than mRNA vaccines. Their ingredients are different. It's a different ingredients but trying to accomplish the same purpose. For the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, these were tested in over 43,783 people in the phase 3 clinical trials, including 34% over the age of 60 and 35% of racially diverse backgrounds in the United States. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine protects everyone from severe COVID-19 and COVID-19 related death. But protection against the infection is unknown at this point. It just hasn't been tested yet. It probably does, protecting against infection, but it's not been tested. Now, the numbers of protection against mild COVID-19 are different in different countries where it's been tested, but it's over 65% protection against mild COVID-19. But yikes, what about these blood clots we heard about in the news? I felt like that when I saw that headline. Thinking about how frequent these occurred, they're close in comparison to what had been noted in the AstraZeneca vaccine, where it was 4 cases in 1 million vaccines, 4 cases of blood clots in 1 million vaccines. So for the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, it's been 6 cases of blood clots in about 7 million doses of Johnson & Johnson vaccine. But we can compare them to each other. They're around the same amount. Now, COVID infections, if we looked at the same number of people who had COVID infections, this would be 165,000 people who had blood clots. So it's much worse to have a COVID infection. Your risk of getting a blood clot is much, much worse. In fact, it's 40,000 times higher if you get a COVID infection than if you received an AstraZeneca or Johnson & Johnson vaccine. As a comparison, when you fly in an airplane, 3 to 5% of people experience blood clots from airplane travel. I have never thought twice about getting on an airplane because of blood clots. So you can put this in perspective in that perspective. And the reference for the airplane travel is down here. Okay, but the #1 rule of medicine is do no harm. So even though there were just 6 people that experienced blood clots out of almost 7 million people, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine administration was paused in the United States. The same issue has not occurred or been noted at all in people vaccinated with the mRNA vaccines out of close to 2 million doses administered. So if we were going to see this same blood clot issue in the mRNA vaccines, we would have seen it out of those 200 million doses that have been administered in the United States. There have been more of these vaccines that have been administered worldwide, and it hasn't been noted anywhere. The blood clot issue has not been noted anywhere in association with the mRNA vaccines. So even though Johnson & Johnson vaccines prevent COVID-19, the CDC paused Johnson & Johnson vaccination for 6 people with blood clots that we do not know were caused by the vaccines. This gives me confidence that they will pause or stop vaccination if there's even a slight risk of harm. So some of the questions that I've heard from friends of mine are, can the COVID-19 vaccine affect my fertility? The answer to that is no. So women became pregnant during the clinical trials for all of the vaccines that have been approved. So Moderna, Pfizer, and Johnson & Johnson. There were women who got pregnant during those vaccine clinical trials. And healthy babies that were conceived during those clinical trials have now been born with antibodies protecting that baby. The vaccine is a warning sign of what coronavirus looks like. So thinking about what coronavirus does, coronavirus infection also will produce antibodies against coronavirus that recognize the exact same thing. And those antibodies do not impact fertility because people who've been infected with coronavirus have not had their fertility impacted. So the vaccine cannot impact fertility. And also just thinking about if these vaccines could be permanent birth control, they would probably be marketed as that. There's a big market for birth control in the world. So if these vaccines work, why are they asking us to still wear masks? Well, one of these reasons is that it's important for people to feel normal wearing a mask. It takes a long time to vaccinate everyone. And so if you go to a party, say, where half of the people are vaccinated and half the people aren't vaccinated, everyone should wear a mask so that everyone feels normal wearing a mask. And that way everyone's protected. I think of this a lot like if you were the only one not drinking at a party, it feels kind of awkward. It would be the same thing if you were the only one wearing a mask. So let's help everyone to stay safe by everyone wearing a mask until most of us are vaccinated. The other reason is new variants may still infect us. We don't really know how well the vaccines help to protect against these new variants. It's like someone who just painted a stripe on a helmet. Now, is that the same enemy helmet or not? Probably different immune systems are going to recognize or not recognize that new change. So we want to protect everyone and protect the unvaccinated people. Masks won't be required when more people are vaccinated. So it'll speed along the process of getting rid of those masks if we all get vaccinated. President Nelson said in the last general conference, do all you can to bring COVID numbers down in your area so that your temple opportunities can increase. Now, I recognize that not everyone will feel comfortable getting a vaccine. Some people feel a lot of anxiety around it. And there are other ways to bring down COVID-19 numbers. Those include wearing a mask whenever you're indoors with anyone or whenever you're even close to someone outdoors. It's really important to bring down those COVID-19 numbers to protect everyone, to try and bring down the number of COVID-19 infections and the number of people who are hurt.
Thank you, Emily. So Angela and I have been looking at the questions as they have come in, and Angela is going to start with the first one.
Yeah, someone was wondering if the COVID virus is small enough to go through masks.
Yes, yes, it must be, or it must be able to get through the sides. So the N95 masks do protect very, very well, but they're also harder to wear for a long time. The ones that are made out of cloth or the ones that are made, the kind of paper ones, they definitely reduce the numbers of virus that get out, but they don't completely prevent the virus from getting through.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the virus is small enough to get through the pores in your mask, but usually the virus is in a droplet, right? Which is
Right.
often bigger than the pores in a
Right.
mask.
Right. Right. So they definitely help. Masks definitely help. There's no question about that.
These are two together.
Okay. So, two about the Johnson & Johnson. Some are considering to wait longer to hear more info before getting the Johnson & Johnson. Is there a downside to waiting for more data? Or actually, let me talk about that Johnson & Johnson specifically, but just in general about the vaccines, just waiting for more data. And so let's talk about that first, and then there's a second Johnson & Johnson question.
Okay, so the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is paused. You can't get it in the United States. So yes, you kind of have to wait if you want that vaccine specifically. For the other vaccines, they've been tested at this point in over 200 million people in the United States alone, because the data that I presented was a little bit old. So we've certainly passed 200,000 doses administered. It is safe, it is effective. The mRNA vaccines are safe and effective, and there's no question about that. There's no advantage to waiting, not even a little bit. In fact, you are putting yourself at risk by waiting. I would, yeah. So the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, I don't know what they'll decide. I did text with a friend of mine who is sitting in on those panels, and they haven't decided yet. They're reviewing all of the information really carefully, and they haven't decided what they're going to do with the vaccine, whether they're going to start it again or not. They don't know whether the blood clots were caused by the vaccine or not. So they're trying to figure that out before they decide either way.
So that sounds like you would suggest that even if it was made available again, the Johnson & Johnson one, that you recommend that someone get a different vaccine over the Johnson & Johnson? Or would you just say, I don't know, what
I would just say get vaccinated as soon as possible. The most important thing is that you get vaccinated as soon as possible. We're in a race against the virus. The virus is mutating, it's spreading, it's building its army, and our only defense against it really is vaccination. So speed is important.
All right, we have one more question here. How many need to get vaccinated before we can stop wearing masks?
That'll depend on the COVID-19 numbers. So we don't know how we respond to the variants, new variants that are arising in unvaccinated people. And so as the COVID-19 numbers go down and the infections are lower, then we won't have to wear masks because most people will be, because the virus isn't around as much. I just remembered that I took out one of the slides that I wanted to. So I said that I would answer whether they could track you with this vaccine. They absolutely cannot. There are not microchips small enough to fit through the needles that are used for vaccination. However, if you're worried about being tracked, social media like Facebook, the internet, your computer in general, your iPhone, your smartphone do track you. So if you're worried about being tracked, those are the things to get rid of. The vaccine can't track you. So with that, I'd like to tell you that there's a lot of different information out there and it's hard to know who to trust. One source that you can look to that will give you science articles that are validated, that have been reviewed by other scientists who don't have a vested interest in the publication, can be found in this search engine called PubMed. So you would just type in PubMed in Google, it'll bring up that website, and then you can search for COVID-19 and whatever you're looking for. These are some of the journal articles that I read. I read a lot more than this, but I couldn't list them all. You can also learn about how the immune system works from this website that Harvard provides. And there's a great animation about how SARS-CoV-19 gets into cells that Dr. Janet Awaza at the University of Utah animated. So you can look for that. And with that, thank you for your attention and stay safe.